November 17, 1928. Chicago, a city soaked in blood and liquor, where the roar of machine guns had become the soundtrack of ambition. Inside the Lexington Hotel, every surface gleamed with polished mahogany, every chandelier reflected wealth and menace in equal measure. Al Capone, age 29, sat at the head of a table that had seen deals shape the underworld itself. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a calculated storm, a man whose reputation for violence was eclipsed only by his instinct for profit. Across from him, a young black man named Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, stepped into a world that had been deliberately closed to people like him. Every eye in the room measured him, every gesture assessed for threat. He carried no gun, no visible protection, only the audacity of a plan that could redefine criminal America. The tension was immediate, suffocating. One misstep, one flinch, and the shadows of Chicago would claim him before he could speak a word. Yet, Bumpy walked steadily to the table, carrying the future of Harlem's numbers game, and a proposition that, if accepted, would make him unstoppable. Bumpy Johnson had come not as a soldier, but as a strategist, representing the powerful Harlem numbers operators led by Stephanie Street Claire. For years, Italian mobs had pressed into black neighborhoods, attempting to extract control through violence, bribery, and intimidation. But Harlem had resilience, structure, and systems far beyond what most outsiders understood. Bumpy arrived with precise calculations: the cost of conflict, the profits lost to constant warfare, the expenditure of blood and law enforcement attention. He knew that in the world of organized crime, intelligence often outweighed firepower. Capone's bodyguards, silent and imposing, followed his every move, yet Bumpy held his composure. He understood the stakes: one wrong word could end not only his mission but his life. Sitting across from America's most feared gangster, he unfolded the numbers: cold, hard dollars juxtaposed against the futility of battle. $4 million of pure, almost effortless income could be secured for Capone, simply by respecting Harlem's territories. The audacity of the proposal was staggering: a black gangster, 23 years old, negotiating with the undisputed king of Chicago, challenging centuries of racial and criminal hierarchy, and emerging unbroken. Capone leaned back, studying Bumpy with the patience of a predator weighing prey that might yet prove cunning. His smile was deliberate, measured, a signal that he was both listening and calculating. The room held its breath, the quiet punctuated only by the faint clink of crystal glasses and the distant hum of the city outside. Bumpy presented the numbers again, carefully detailing the expenditures of Dutch Schultz and other white rivals attempting to seize Harlem's operations. Every dollar spent, every life lost, every federal investigation triggered by violence was documented, a ledger of futility. Johnson's voice was steady, unshaken by the weight of the room or the lethal potential of the man before him. Capone's advisors, Jake, Greasy Thumb, Guzik and Frank Nitti, exchanged glances, reading the tension like open books. The unspoken question hung over the table: would Capone recognize this as an opportunity or a threat? The answer would not only define Bumpy's survival, but the structure of organized crime for decades to come. In that silence, the air itself seemed to contract, as if the building recognized it was about to witness a turning point in criminal history. For 3 hours, the Lexington Hotel became a crucible of strategy and audacity. Bumpy laid out Harlem's proposition: independence in black-controlled territories, a modest tribute to Capone, and an exchange of operational knowledge that promised long-term mutual profit. He spoke not with deference, but with clarity and authority, signaling that Harlem was no peripheral player. It was a sophisticated machine capable of teaching even the most seasoned Italian operators a lesson in efficiency. Capone listened, calculating the implications beyond mere money. The offer challenged social norms, racial hierarchies, and the unspoken code of the underworld. Yet, in those calculations, he saw an undeniable logic. Fighting Harlem would drain resources, attract law enforcement, and risk destabilizing the meticulously controlled Chicago rackets. Cooperation promised security, stability, and substantial profit. When Bumpy finished, the silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Capone's mind, honed on years of violence and negotiation, was already mapping a new order, one where racial boundaries and crime were no longer an obstacle, but a framework for unprecedented organization. This meeting was more than a deal, it was the birth of a hidden architecture shaping American organized crime. Capone's response was measured, almost theatrical. He rose from his chair, walked to the window overlooking Michigan Avenue, and let the weight of the city's chaos seep in. For a moment, Bumpy and the advisors waited, the tension tightening like a coiled spring. Then Capone turned, his gaze locking onto Johnson's. "I accept your arrangement," he said, voice calm but resolute. The declaration was more than an agreement, it was an acknowledgement of Bumpy's intellect, courage, and vision. Capone explained that the logic behind Harlem's proposal mirrored conclusions he had independently reached: perpetual conflict was costly, intelligence in operations was undervalued, and the future of organized crime lay not only in bootlegging, but in gambling, labor rackets, and narcotics. Bumpy listened, absorbing not just the words but the subtle shift of power. He was no longer merely a representative of Harlem, he had become a critical architect in a national network, a liaison whose influence would ripple from Chicago to New York, Detroit, and beyond. In that room, history quietly pivoted, and the unlikeliest of alliances was forged, invisible to the public, but destined to reshape criminal America. Capone did not see Harlem as a threat to be crushed, but as a system to be integrated. He outlined his vision: black operators would maintain autonomy in their territories, pay a reduced tribute, and share technical knowledge of their numbers operations. Bumpy would remain in Chicago, serving as the intermediary between Capone's organization and Harlem's network, ensuring compliance, communication, and efficiency. This arrangement demanded trust, discipline, and absolute discretion. A single breach could ignite wars that would spill blood across multiple states. The advisors, Guzik and Nitti, understood the stakes but were forced to accept the logic. The room was a study in controlled tension, every gesture, every sip of wine, every folded hand measured for intent. Outside, Chicago continued its relentless churn of violence, Prohibition-era raids, and political corruption. Inside, two men had created an invisible cord connecting black and Italian syndicates, built not on friendship or social equality, but on cold calculations of profit, survival, and strategic foresight. By the end of the morning, Bumpy had not only survived, he had secured leverage, knowledge, and a position that would make him untouchable within Harlem and beyond. The agreement extended beyond Chicago, setting a precedent for cooperation between black and Italian syndicates across the nation. Harlem's operators gained protection, autonomy, and access to the intelligence networks of one of America's most feared crime empires. Capone, in turn, secured millions in unchallenged revenue, reduced violence in his city, and established a model for national organization that no one else could replicate. Bumpy's presence in Chicago symbolized more than liaison duties. He embodied a bridge between two criminal worlds, a rare figure who commanded respect from men who would otherwise see him as expendable. Every interaction, every negotiation, reinforced a code of discipline, secrecy, and mutual interest. The young gangster had stepped into a world of lethal ambition and emerged not just alive, but elevated. Meanwhile, federal agents continued to probe the chaos of Chicago, unaware that the most stable and profitable structures operated in the shadows, hidden from their scrutiny. The unspoken understanding in that Lexington dining room would endure for decades, influencing turf wars, policy games, and prison allegiances, as the nation's criminal underworld became a carefully balanced hierarchy of race, territory, and mutual advantage. Bumpy Johnson's role extended far beyond numbers and tribute. He became the unseen coordinator of a national strategy. Capone recognized that the future of organized crime depended on the disciplined management of territories, alliances, and intelligence. Harlem's operators trained Italian crews in the mechanics of numbers, policy, and street-level accounting, creating a network that maximized profit while minimizing exposure. Meanwhile, prison corridors across the country echoed with the implications of this arrangement. Black and Italian inmates, often former enforcers or lieutenants, understood that their actions outside were now tied to a broader, carefully orchestrated system. Violence still occurred, but it became calculated, regulated, and profitable rather than chaotic. By now, Bumpy was more than a negotiator, he was a strategist, a diplomat, and a symbol of power that could not be ignored. For viewers who understand the weight of survival and influence, comment, Bumpy rules, twice to acknowledge the cunning and audacity required to command respect in two worlds simultaneously. Each step, each decision, each alliance reinforced the fragile balance that kept both Harlem and Chicago profitable while avoiding full-scale war. The ramifications of that November meeting reached far beyond the Lexington Hotel. Capone's Italian network now had a blueprint for cooperation with black syndicates in Detroit, Baltimore, and New York, while Bumpy Johnson's Harlem operation gained legitimacy, protection, and leverage unseen in most of American organized crime. Across the country, the underworld began to operate with invisible lines, unspoken boundaries, and mutually enforced rules. The code of silence became stricter, any deviation threatened not just local enforcers but the entire national structure. Inside prisons, alliances formed between black and Italian inmates mirrored the street-level agreements, ensuring that influence, intelligence, and loyalty extended even behind bars. Bumpy's position grew more formidable, his decisions carrying the weight of lives and fortunes. Political and law enforcement corruption, carefully manipulated, allowed these arrangements to thrive while keeping federal attention elsewhere. By transforming conflict into calculated collaboration, Bumpy and Capone created a structure that not only multiplied wealth but also redefined the power dynamics of the American underworld for decades, leaving a hidden legacy that historians would only begin to uncover long after both men were gone. By the end of 1928, Bumpy Johnson had become more than a Harlem envoy, he was a linchpin in a national criminal network, operating with authority, intelligence, and a reputation that demanded respect. Capone had secured both profit and stability, while Harlem gained autonomy and influence, creating a rare equilibrium in an otherwise violent and chaotic underworld. The alliance reshaped the economics of crime, territories were respected, tribute ensured compliance, and knowledge transfer between black and Italian operators strengthened operations from Chicago to New York. Prison hierarchies adapted, surveillance networks expanded, and the federal government remained blind to the architecture that quietly governed illicit activity. Every decision, every handshake, every ledger entry reinforced a system built on strategy rather than brute force. Bumpy Johnson had walked into Chicago risking his life and emerged as an unstoppable figure, a symbol of intelligence, courage, and calculated audacity. The deal made that morning did not simply alter the course of two men, it rewrote the rules of organized crime in America, leaving a hidden legacy of power, discipline, and pragmatism that would endure long after their names faded into history.